Welcome to Food in General, a podcast presented by Sunday in General that looks to explore the nuances of food through candid conversation, information exchange, and opinion commentary. I'm your host, Luke van der Merwe, and thanks for tuning in. Before I introduce today's guest, I just want to let you guys know that I'll be taking a few weeks off from recording the podcast. I want to reset and think about the content going forward from today. I personally want to dive deep into everything that's been going on, but I need to understand how to do that. So if you have any suggestions, ideas, thoughts, or you want to collab on the podcast, please get in touch with me. Episode 4 of Series 1, where we look to understand our food businesses in a post-COVID-19 era. I will be chatting to Iming and Dan from Meuse Farm and Food Flow, and Daniel Smith from ABALOBI. In this conversation, we look at the impact that the restaurant shutdown has had on the food supply chain, and more specifically, the food supply chain that small-scale farmers and fishers represent. We briefly touch on the sustainability of the veggie box home delivery model and the logistical challenges that both Iming and Dan faced when switching from restaurant deliveries to home deliveries. Dan walks us through ABALOBI's swift marketplace pivot, and Iming gives us more insight into how Food Flow was born. Both Iming and Dan represent organizations that are literally transforming the way we interact with food, and I for one was super grateful to have some time to chat to them. Just a quick note, we had a few audio issues on this podcast, so there are sections that I'll introduce the chat, but I hope this doesn't deter you, as this was a super insightful chat and I really enjoyed it. So let's jump straight in. Iming and Daniel Smith, thank you for joining me on Food in General. It's such an honor to be chatting to you guys today. Thank you for giving me your time. You guys both come from organizations that share such commonality, and in a sense, one represents land and one represents the ocean, which I think is super cool. So thanks for being here. Just to establish a context for the listener, I would like to briefly look at Meuse Farm and ABALOBI before COVID. So Iming, if you can just jump in and take us through what January, February, and mid-March looked like for you guys, and then sort of when COVID hit.
Cool, yeah. So basically January, February, mid-March is very much our high season because it's directly linked. All of our sales are pretty much to the high-end restaurant market, and that, of course, is their high season. This year in particular, it was January, February, and early March. December was slow. So we were working crazy hours and delivering to about 17 restaurants during that period. I think on the Sunday that the president announced that the the borders were closing, or they weren't allowing international flights, I had sort of my 17 orders from the different restaurants coming in by Sunday evening. And when we woke up on Monday, they were all canceled, pretty much with that announcement. I think I might have had 2 left, and they were canceled by midday on Monday, basically. So yeah, literally overnight, whatever that was in mid-March was basically going from our normal sales to zero. One thing I would say is that luckily, and I think, on your Kyle and Gabby were also mentioning the restaurant season is till Easter. So I think I was expecting the restaurants to sort of have 2 more good weeks and then to really taper down. And that was what our fields really looked like as well. It's basically 2 good weeks of a lot of sales and then closing out for the winter.
And Dan, I'm assuming you guys at ABALOBI share a similar sort of trend there.
Yeah, it had been a great summer. I think yellowtail season, fish running along the south coast especially, stressed by community, kind of in full action, supplying a very similar market to what Iming mentioned as far as high-end restaurants. And that's to watch orders change from upward of 500, 600 kilos on any particular delivery day to all of a sudden, I think it went down to 40 and then down to 5. So watch that unfold in a matter of 2 or 3 days, and to see what impact that has on the fishers that we work with. We're obviously the platform and the kind of facilitator or intermediary between a fisher sitting on the west coast or on the south coast and a chef that's sitting in his restaurant looking for fresh catch of the day to be to be getting onto his plates. So it was drastic and very similar, just to see things change so quickly.
I think, like I said, you both come from organizations that represent such a unique position in that you strive for a profit of a different kind. It's a profit of livelihood. It's a profit that looks to empower communities and promotes, social economic development. So restaurants close, your supply chain pretty much comes to a halt. What are the knock-on effects for essentially your profit of livelihood?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a direct impact on livelihood, as we've discussed and as we've seen. Something I didn't mention was we had fish heading up to Johannesburg, so we had hotels, restaurants up there. So it really has been bustling, and to all of a sudden have that crash. It was interesting because while the restaurant side crashed, we were fortunate to be able to continue with our commercial side. So as far as retailers, we've had consistent support, and with the lockdown came those suppliers struggling to access imports. So we weren't bringing as much fish in from places like Australia and New Zealand. And it was great to see a shift in some ways towards more uptake of local catch. So that was really exciting and something that's helped, but certainly not maintained the volume that we had before. And as far as livelihoods, chatting with the fishers on our advisory, we've got a group of fishers that kind of hold a bit of a senior position in what we're doing and trying to manage our organization. And it's the typical real story where you're hearing of people struggling to feed their families, and sure, kids aren't going to school, but school fees still need to be paid, and food still needs to be put on the table, and really it cut the income of fishers almost down to zero. Quite intense.
Iming, does Meuse share a similar pattern? Can you walk us through the setup there and the effects that it's had on your farmers?
Yeah, so I think for our farm specifically, we employ 3 people between 3 and 5 days a week. And we were in a lucky position. This is our 3rd season. The first season we did try to grow through winter, learned how slow a lot of the restaurants are in winter and that it just wasn't worth it. Our 2nd winter, therefore, we actually weren't supplying to restaurants after about the 1st of May. So like I had said, a lot of our crop plan is planned to taper down. So we rely on those sort of summer months to be able to save enough to be able to pay our staff through winter. As far as where we stand with salaries for our own staff and for ourselves, we're pretty good. I think for at least carrying us through now. I was speaking to one of the other farmer suppliers last week when we bumped into each other delivering, and we both were saying, for us, I think the big question is really the next season forward, as opposed to this last season. What happens if and when restaurants will open? What is, how tight are their pockets going to be? All of that sort of thing, because we both plan, to save enough, basically. Knowing that in the past 5 years, there have been various reasons for crashes of the market that has been supporting township farmers, and that very much has seemed to have the same impact of what Dan was describing for the fishers, where, there's just the market disappears basically, and you have people who it is their livelihoods, and they go from, within a week to not having any customers. So a little bit of a different situation for our farm directly, and for, I think, the experience of some of the other smaller and especially the township growers.
So at this point we had some audio difficulties, but Iming, Dan and myself are chatting about veggie box deliveries and the sustainability of that delivery model, as well as the logistical challenges that lie with it.
One customer who wasn't a restaurant that we started with, I think it was in Feb, which was Buy Fresh online. And so what was nice there is that we just had a very easy into moving a bit more of our product to somebody who already exists as a home delivery service. And that uptick was immediate, basically. We also, we've definitely sort of every week there's more and more veg box schemes who sort of like contact and say, do you have any products? And I know also speaking to Kim and Emma, that they were saying, I think in 1 week, they went from something like they had about 25 regular veg box customers, and then it was up to, nearly 200. But one of the, I think, one of the questions is that sustainable, whether that's financial or just like psychologically or physically sustainable, to actually move from delivering, in my case, if I was to move from 17 restaurants to try to do even just 50 home deliveries, the cost skyrockets and the capacity just isn't there, and the value of the product goes down tremendously. So your profit margin is a lot less, and your labor costs are a lot more. And there's only so many hours in the day. So again, I know when we started Food Flow, we said, okay, we'll order 100 bags, one address. Logistically, that's just so much easier for a small farm or a small organization to handle than 100 bags to 100 addresses.
Every week there seems to be a new food box delivery scheme that's come onto the play, and I think it's tragic to say, but a lot of the novelty sort of worn off. And I mean, Dan, how's your guys' ordering system? And we'll get into your pivots now, but how's your sort of demand for home deliveries?
Yeah, it was amazing to see a similar trajectory to that which you described of Mtunzi, where we couldn't keep up with the registrations. There were literally hundreds every day, and we couldn't click the buttons fast enough to get those people onboarded. So yeah, it was amazing to see that really positive response. We'll, like you said, we'll get into the pivot of how we made that happen. But yeah, there was a lot of background work that probably could have been done more thorough in order to have a streamlined system. But we were responding to a crisis and trying our best to ensure that fishers could keep fishing and that they could keep getting paid. And yeah, so I suppose a big one has been, we now sit on 2,000 registered buyers, so people's homes that we could potentially get to. And like Iming says, that's a logistical ask of note.
So let's look at this. Mid-March comes, restaurants close, Monday, or your orders get cancelled. Iming, you're sitting with an abundance of produce. The initiative Food Flow is then born. Can you walk us through Food Flow? And it's obviously a reaction to having a whole bunch of vegetables sitting with no destination.
Yeah, so basically about Monday, realized that there's a whole bunch of other farmers who are probably in a similar situation and don't have customers. Wake up and, my 2.5-year-old is on school holiday. And of course, she just gets lunch and it's a nice to have at school and all that sort of thing, but also realizing from sort of my past background, which is in infectious diseases, public health, and sort of community development work, that there's a whole lot of other kids that depend on that school lunch as basically their main food source. And with the schools closing, that they weren't going to have that. And so luckily, through my previous work life in the NGO world, had a few connections, was able to speak to somebody in the Department of Education to better understand what the plans were going to be there for the Western Cape, what the delay was going to be most likely in implementing anything. A few people at Oxfam South Africa to find out would we be able to use their administrative capacity. And then another friend with a lot of experience in community development work who had time on her hands, and whether she would be willing to sort of initially volunteer that time to be able to set up this thing that was going to purchase food from small scale growers to be able to supply it to partner organizations in the townships and communities that were in need of food for those organizations to distribute. So that all kind of came together in a few hours on Monday night, basically. And then we were pretty much ready to launch on Wednesday. We were just waiting for our web tickets platform to be able to accept donations from people. And so that launched on Friday. We really initially first spoke with the Mtunzi group, and we wanted to slot in as easily as possible with the various farmer schedules. So sort of as a farmer myself, knowing that everyone was sort of running around, you've got all these other logistics to figure out. How do we just fit in as conveniently as possible as another customer, hopefully a really good customer, pays on time, easy to manage, one delivery address. So we wanted to slot in with Umtunzi's buying schedule. And our original aim was, I don't think there had been very many other community initiatives launched within that week. We didn't know what people's response was going to be. So we said, okay, if we can support and feed, the community in one help NGO, that would be great. And we had amazing uptake. So yeah, we're 2 weeks older than lockdown, I guess. So that would make us 11 weeks old. And have been expanding across a bunch of 4 different provinces. There's definitely been a decrease in donations, which is to be expected, I think. But yeah, that was the short rise of food flow. We as a farm actually don't sell anything through food flow. Part of that reason is because our products are so specialized that it's hard to find any normal consumer who wants to tackle a salsify or burdock root, let alone putting it into a vegetable bag for the townships. So unfortunately, our current crop selection is really not very relevant, but that's okay. So yeah, Food Flow was able to purchase, so far it's about 9,000 veg bags worth from a lot of the other small scale growers, primarily in Cape Town, but also in a few other provinces.
So Food Flow as a collective purchases veg bags and then distributes to food insecure communities is basically...
Yep. Yeah, so the organization itself never actually sees the bags. So we purchase for example, from ABALOBI or from Umtunzi or from Petty, identify a partner organization that is geographically near to them or is able to receive their product. And that distribution organization either collects from the farmer or the fisher group or receives by delivery from the farmer or fisher group. And then they're just responsible for getting it to the people that they've identified as needing food parcels or preparing it in their soup kitchens.
And what are you doing with all the produce that comes out of Meuse farm at the moment?
So luckily, because our farm plan has sort of tapered down, we actually did a bit of a scramble to try to seed a bunch of stuff in time to be able to try to sell to the increased demand or just to supply it to people who needed food, really. So our scramble was sort of actually the other direction. Most of the stuff that we have that we're still harvesting, we are selling via Buy Fresh. We're selling through some of the restaurants that have sort of picked up veg bags. We're doing a small veg bag collection at the farm, but we really had tapered down quite a lot. We're lucky we do have cold storage facilities, so we don't have to move it quite as quickly. And then a lot of our crops are ones that, because it's full, they're crops that sit in the ground, so they're just kind of growing a little bit bigger now, really. Right now, for sure, the demand is more than what we can supply of most crops. That doesn't hold true again for salsify. But our problem was that our farm plan didn't actually cater for selling a lot right now. That said, and I think we might get into it later, I guess, but the question is at what price we can actually sell that stuff for. So there's a demand, but whether that price point is supporting a viable farm is a big question.
Yeah, that is true. If there's any chef listening to this who can come up with a recipe for salsify for households, please get in touch with Iming. Yeah, and I want to chat about ABALOBI's pivot. I believe it was something you guys were looking at before COVID anyway. I think it's probably just accelerated it, like COVID has accelerated everything. Can you chat about your shift from supplying restaurants and commercial to essentially supplying households?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, it had always been on our kind of horizon to run a home delivery model of some sort, and that just sped up. So we'd actually done a test leading up to COVID, whereby we'd partnered with Frankie Fenner Meat Merchant, and the idea there was a collection model. So a bit like Umtunzi were doing with veg, Iming, I know you were doing that on the farm as well, where you could come past and you could collect. And as far as models, it worked, but I think we needed to sell it a bit harder, and the value proposition needed to be made a bit clearer to people that were interested in a product like fish. It's specialized, right? So, I mean, you go to a butcher for your meat, but not often do you go to the fisher for your fish, and this was that kind of concept. So there was a lot of learnings from that process, as far as how does this tech now translate from it's no longer a chef sitting in his restaurant at 11 or 12 o'clock doing stock take planning for his next menu or for the next bout of fish, but rather someone at home who is thinking about a snook on the braai or a pan-fried Cape Bream. And again, the species are quite specific here. So a bit like salsify in your home kitchen, a whole fish with the bones and the eyes, and okay, there's no scales, but whoa, like, is that something that I want in my kitchen? And if so, then how do we make that work? And how do I handle that? So yeah, there's been quite a lot of kind of public awareness that we've done around how do you fillet a fish, for example. The pivot was mostly around how do we shape our tech to suit a person at home that can then see exactly what it is that they're paying for. So a big principle that we're working on is transparency. Transparency and traceability. So knowing exactly how much the fish is getting, but at the same time knowing, well, what is it that I'm paying for as far as the delivery fee? There's additional costs. Iming mentioned it, as far as how do you get this decentralized model to actually work? So the 10 deliveries have now become 100, and that really did happen very quickly. So how do we ensure that that's viable, and how do we compete with the likes of a Pick and Pay or a Woolworths that are doing this on a 2-week waiting list, and people are used to that system. So it was rapid, it wasn't seamless, and it wasn't perfect, that's for sure, but I think it was really amazing to have customers that had bought into the model before via the restaurants and had seen the QR code and had interacted with the story behind the fish, and getting to know who it is that they're supporting when they're buying or supporting a restaurant in this case. And I think that translated really quickly. And I mean, a huge thanks to the chefs that kind of went out there and promoted our pivot and kind of owned our pivot as part of theirs. And that speaks to the daily model as well. And we can speak a bit more about that. But something like a vacuum packed fish that is being able to be traced back to the fisher, you can put it in your freezer and kind of order bulk if you need it. So yeah, the tech side of it is an interesting one, and while it's sophisticated, it's complex. So making sure that's seamless and the end consumer is comfortable with what he's paying, but B, obviously the product, and making sure that our traceability offering is still true, and you can scan the QR code and you can know exactly who caught it, how it was caught, where it was caught, and I suppose most importantly, how much that fisher got paid for that catch.
So are you guys obviously still running the marketplace? It's obviously still open to households. Is it something, now that we've gone into level 3, are you slowly seeing maybe an uptake from any restaurants that might be opening for takeaways? Are you going to be continuing running this model indefinitely, or? Yeah,
so sure. To answer your question around restaurants, we've definitely seen, I think, like with Iming, a bit more interest. The restaurants are starting to pivot to, if not already, their own home delivery schemes and trying to get creative. I think of some of the restaurants out in the winelands that are promoting wide open spaces and picnics. So yeah, these guys are starting to push the boundaries already, and they're asking for people to come through and sit on their lawns and practice social distancing, which gets us excited because that means there's a market that can turn on again. As far as continuing, I must be honest, we've struggled with, if we are going to continue with this decentralized model of getting to people's homes, how do we ensure that we can logistically make sure that that's viable? I mean, like you said, people are now going back to work. There's timing issues. There really is logistics considerations, which up until now our app has not been built for. And we're managing it. So WhatsApp is a wonderful platform, and it's been really useful to have that kind of engagement and connection. I think we'll shift it slightly and try and focus more towards that collection point once again. So I think directed in that direction. But for now, we're continuing. We've got orders going out. I think we've got 70 people that are receiving fish tomorrow, that ordered on the app today. And yeah, until we get into too much trouble with our logistics system, we'll keep going.
Similar to ABALOBI, before lockdown even, I currently did all the restaurant deliveries. I think it's really important that there's a direct connection from the farmer to customer, and I don't think it, for various reasons, exists very much in South Africa. Partly for that traceability thing that Dan talks about with ABALOBI. I think it's important that the customer can actually ask, what exactly does organic mean for you, and who is growing it and whatnot. I think that what COVID has also emphasized is, Kyle and Gabby in the last episode, they were talking about how much more their costs are for home deliveries, and all those logistic costs. And so definitely, even my existing restaurant customers, it's very clear that, their pockets are a lot tighter, which is completely understandable and realistic. So even we've discounted all of our current prices by 30%. In order to try to make things more viable for them as they try to make their home deliveries more viable. And we're pretty sure that, even should the restaurants be able to reopen and function, with their social distancing rules, we know that our prices are going to have to come down quite a lot for their market to succeed. So, I think that come next summer, it's going to be a lot smaller of a profit margin for the existing restaurants, but we are hoping that some of them do come back, obviously. We had been thinking about quite custom direct from farm veg boxes. We're taking quite a long-term view in that. We've got vague, sort of open to sort of development ideas about where the farm will go. And we are thinking about how the boxes can help us curate who our intended long-term customers are, and trying to really understand what our offering is, which we know is sort of unique veg, and we know it's varieties that you can't get elsewhere, and we know it's about how it's grown and a little bit more of the story, and it's perhaps also the connection with the chefs and what they can help us offer. And how to create it in a way that is about the relationship we want somebody to have with our farm in 5 years' time and what we can offer. So kind of not a big rush to just move a lot of product, but to find the right people and to offer it in the right way for them. Probably not a huge number of people either. And then, again, with the Buy Fresh and the other partner box distributors, one of the key things for me is, I saw Lovely post at another farm mention, and she said one of the great things about direct to customer is that she gets to choose customers who share the same values and ethics that she raised the food with, and that's really important. And so there's a lot of these veg boxes, and who knows if the uptake will stay after COVID. It's one of the challenges, I think, as a veg farmer is, I'm planning for how many bed meters of something am I going to be able to grow to harvest in 5 months' time, but is the customer still going to be there in 5 months? But I think identifying those home distribution or collection partners that share the same ethics, unfortunately, again, there's a big cut to our profit margin in working with any of them. And then the last thing, it's actually interesting that Dan mentioned that some of the restaurants in Stellenbosch who were trying to sort of advertise their open spaces. And that is one of our thoughts. We are literally currently moving our cold room down to another space. And for the last year, we've had plans for basically a social dining space, which that might have to change, but also sort of a processing kitchen and, understanding that we do have space on the farm. So whether we try to do something where there's rotating chefs on a weekly basis who are curating picnics that people can do with total social distancing and no touch, no front of house service. It's just placed at a table stationed around the farm. chefs are able to take, all the profits, and the farm sells veg into those meals. So that was something we were going to look at anyways. And I think that there's, that might be quite an interesting avenue come spring, summer, when our weather's slightly more reliable, basically. So a few ideas.
It's awesome that you guys are thinking ahead. We have 5.5 minutes left, so got to wrap this up pretty quickly. It's so hard to always cram stuff into 40 minutes. But I see Dan Barber launching the Farming Kitchen project. I see Lily Kwong doing Freedom Gardens platform. Do you think COVID-19 is going to accelerate our understanding of the small-scale farmers and the role that they play in the supply chain?
I think you used two fantastic examples, and I think it's already been a positive response as far as this move towards local, and it's champions like that and chefs that we're working with here in Cape Town that are kind of pushing this local agenda and have from 3 years ago when we launched this restaurant supported fishery, where the goal really was to link chef with supplier. And in this case, it was the fisher, Iming as the farmer and the farm. So I think, I draw a lot of inspiration out of it. And I definitely think it's about time that we shorten those supply chains. And it's something that we've started doing. And I really hope that this can have a bit of a lasting effect. And it will, because we're now more aware. This has forced us to, I suppose, introspect in many ways, to think a bit more about where this food has come from. On the one hand, many people have had more time on their hands, so they've been in the kitchen a bit more. And I think it begs us to ask those questions. And I think it's if we can take one positive thing out of it, it's definitely that there's that mind shift and a bit more awareness around that.
I hope there's a huge shift to supporting small scale farmers and the supply chain that they bring. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I think if anyone wants to get hold of you guys, where can they get hold of you? Where can they follow you? Instagram, emails, what are you willing to throw out there?
So for Meuse Farm on Instagram, it's at Meuse Farm. It's MEUSE. We have a Facebook page that is highly inactive, and our website, musefarm.com, and there's email contact information there for us. Also for Food Flow, it's at FoodFlowZA on Instagram, and it's foodflowza.com for the website, and there's information there, just more information about what the project is and how people can support with donations as well.
Dan, where can we download ABALOBI and get some fish into our homes?
Yeah, brilliant. So download the ABALOBI app on your Play Store, whether it's Android or iPhone. Literally just hit download and you'll see need an account, and you click that button and there's a little registration process. If you're a restaurant as well, you can select an option there as being a restaurant. As for kind of a bit more about the impact that we're having and where you can read more about the story behind who we are and what defines our organization. Instagram is a great one. We've got our impact report up there that's just been released. Also really excited to mention our Coding for Crayfish documentary that's coming out. David Shoshola is one of the champions. I'm so excited. So hopefully we can catch up on that. And then, I suppose Instagram, Facebook, we are fairly active, believe it or not. We've got fishers on there that are still spreading the word through Facebook. So that's really cool. And Twitter at ABALOBI_app across all of those platforms. So check it out.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Have a good one. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
And that's another food in general conversation. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Iming and Dan as much as I did. I hope you gained some insight into small-scale producers and fishers and the supply chain that they represent and how challenging it can be for a small-scale producer. I would like to encourage everyone to seek out produce from small-scale farmers and producers and fishers. Grab a fish through ABALOBI's app, you can download it, or donate to VegBox through FoodFlow. Every bit helps, and we really need to support the small-scale producers and fishers as best we can. They represent the future of food supply for this country. I firmly believe that. As always, if you have any ideas for the show, if you just want to get in touch, please DM me at Sunday in General on Instagram, or send me an email at sundayingeneral@gmail.com. Awesome, guys. See you soon.